Hi, this is Sia Anagnostou with Digitalis Commons. I lead strategic partnerships at the Commons. We are a nonprofit organization born from Digitalis Ventures, and we focus on supporting healthcare innovations that may not fit the VC mold. We do that through supporting funders of all types, including government, philanthropy, and others, and helping them think through product development and commercialization. And a big part of our practice is working with our experts in residence network that come from a variety of backgrounds. And we're here today to hear from Sophie Chapelle, who's one of our XIRs, as we call them, about the TTP. So, Sophie, I'll hand it to you for your background and for the presentation.
Thank you, Sia. So great to be here with you. Why don't I share my slides? Because we actually do have a slide about me. So let's see if I can figure this out. All right. So I'm Vice President of Business Development at Rise Therapeutics and an expert in residence at Digitalis Commons. So essentially bringing this commercial and product development experience to Digitalis. And it really spans the past 30 years. It tells you my age from big pharma, drug development, and diagnostics, medical device, and digital health. These are some of the companies that I worked with, and I'm a chemical engineer by background, but what I essentially have specialized in, if you will, is this idea of beginning with the end in mind and focusing on the end users and really bringing this dimension very early on in the design of products, the development of products, and then my experience has been in then launching the products and then seeing what it's like. Um, so the types of products that I've worked on here, cover not only these different types of products, but also a variety of indications in neurology and autoimmune diseases, and also global health, which was really, really interesting. And that was also at the time of COVID and all the challenges there that we had in detecting the virus that was circulating. And in fact, I'll be using an example from that experience as we go through some of the slides. What we're going to do today is talk about this thing we affectionately call the TTP, the Target Technology Profile, and how we think it can really help bring clarity to the program goals and to the communication of all stakeholders, but also how it can be done really quickly and with the use of tools that I'm sure you're already using quite a bit, like Perplexity or ChatGPT. And you may wonder, why should we spend any time on this? Of course, I talked to you about the benefits, but let's pause here for a minute. And, the main reason why we want to actually take time and a little bit of resources for doing this is because we as humans, we have what's called the solution first bias. It's not just me, it's not just you, it's everyone. We see a problem, we want to help, we have an idea of how to, and we run to it. So I can tell you that the world is littered with failed products and startups because we get enamored with the solution and we don't actually spend enough time thoroughly analyzing the problems that we're trying to solve. And in healthcare, it's multidimensional. And in a way, the problem you're trying to solve is living in a very complex ecosystem. Um, the types of technologies that we all want to and need to innovate on will eventually be embedded in a whole range of products like new medications, diagnostics, medical devices, even foods or instruments. And you've probably all heard of the TPP, the Target Product Profile, because that's already used quite a bit by funding agencies and the industry is using this a lot, such that they create this template for a product, so everybody can align and share the same assumptions. So your TTP is the technology target profile. It's the blueprint for the technology that will then be embedded in the products. And you want to think about these different dimensions here, because again, eventually you're going to want to fit in an ecosystem. And if I go to my next slide, this is just, a way to illustrate the complexity in which we live from when it comes to the healthcare system. So again, to create a TTP, we're getting back to that idea of really understanding the problem to be solved. And you want to think about the medical condition itself and then the predicted evolution, right? Most chronic diseases, with the Western lifestyle, obviously it's not looking very good, and diseases do evolve, and your technology will have an impact into products several years down the line. So you want to have the idea of today, but also to the future. And then you want to frame that medical problem by the performance of the existing solutions of today, but also you've got to give some thoughts to the future products that will be powered by potentially future technologies. So, taking the time to describe this gap, and then the idea is to translate that understanding into a clear set of requirements. You want to do this as early as possible because, again, then you'll have something a little bit more thought through that you can share very easily with your all stakeholders, not just on the technical side, but also on the business side. And the TTP is a living document, and you can actually find target product profile instructions in a lot of different places. We just mentioned one here. And when you actually look through what they're proposing in terms of like, oh, here are all the questions you should answer, and here are all the people that you should talk to, it could be pretty overwhelming and daunting, right? And what we're saying here is that, of course, you can go pretty far in this process, but that's not what we're proposing today. We're proposing a shortcut to bring all these dimensions quickly to the forefront right now. And the way to do that is by creating a simple table. And depending on the types of, in a way, future products that you're thinking of, some of these dimensions may or may not be relevant, but obviously we're talking about medical solutions. So we're always going to think about like how efficacious we want things to be. We're thinking always about how accurate a particular set of measurements should be in the end, the safety of your product or future products, the ease of use, and then the cost. And this is where I want to talk to you briefly about an example that I have lived through at the time of COVID. There was a rush, of course, to detect the virus. And we all saw one day on the shelves the Abbott nasal swab. But you also know that you were going to get tested with PCR test to detect the nucleic acid of the virus. The product that you could use at home was a very simple lateral flow type test. And as you know, you had to be at a certain viral load in order to be positive, which basically meant that we missed a whole lot of people who were infected um, in the very early days, right, of their infection. You could only pick them up later with this lateral flow. So that was sort of like the current standard. And the only way that you could get a super sensitive test was to send your test to the lab using PCR. Now, myself and many others in the industry, we actually all rushed to use the most advanced enzymes and processes in order to detect the nucleic acid of these viruses, but in a lateral flow format or some kind of colorimetric format. And we all really believed in this, that it was possible. And an enormous amount of investment was made into bringing these sets of reagents and enzymes into a product that people could use at home. But guess what? Most of these enzymes had to be heated. And so to heat something, you need power, right? So this is no longer just a disposable test, right? Because if you have batteries in there, imagine how much you're going to pollute the environment. And so a lot of companies came up with these like fairly cheap devices, but they all had to be plugged in or they all had to have batteries. And these products got launched, but I could tell you, look for them today. There's really not very many on the market. And the reason being is that not only the environmental impact, but fundamentally, even just the simple cost of a battery for a lateral flow test. For these types of tests, we're talking about $2 a test, and you're just not going to reach that. And so, what the technology investment should have been was in paper batteries, very, very cheap batteries. And nobody was actually, we didn't have time because the COVID pandemic hit us. But I think we're talking about these kinds of transformative investments in technologies. And you want to think of some of these aspects because here I'm talking about ease of use and cost. And I've given some crazy numbers there for some, big, let's say, instruments. But in the case of these diagnostic tests that I just talked about, you're talking pennies to make a test really widely used. And so, lessons learned. And this is why we wanted to kind of capture these important dimensions. And you all will be working as a team to define these various dimensions of your target technology profile. And literally, you can take this slide um, and turn this into prompts that you can then plug into either ChatGPT or Perplexity. I recommend the pro versions. Um, and you talk to the AI and you capture, and that's the great thing is they'll not only do quite a bit of broad research, but they'll summarize it for you. And you can put all of that in an easy Word document that supports the table that we just talked about. And so together with the table and then this document, this has been my experience working with our program manager for one of the our page programs is we had the table, we had the document, and every time we were talking to somebody new, like, listen, let us send you a document ahead of time and you will use that as briefing and it brings everybody up to speed and then the conversation is so much easier and then you can really guide people and also challenge, right, some of your assumptions. So it's just a really helpful tool and Digitalis Commons is here to help you do that. And I will pass it on to Sia at this point, where you have the power and the expertise of the XIRs in the network to work with you on one document like this. But obviously, there's more dimensions. And Sia, up to you here.
Yeah, thank you. So, um, I, I provided a little bit of color earlier on the work we do. Today's talk with Sophie is a demonstration of how we embed with funders and program managers to support them, the TTP being one of the case studies. And so here, um, this is the process of how we've supported our clients around this particular arena. If you go to the next slide, Sophie, I can give a bit more color. So our model is sort of hybrid. We work employing this tiger team concept, which is adopted from um, government and tech models, where we build just-in-time teams depending on the needs of the project, pulled often from our experts in residence across a variety of domains and skill sets. And then at the epicenter of this, so on the right, you see this product development concept. At the epicenter of this is our internal team of commercialization leads from the Digitalis Commons staff who are embedded throughout a project and who pull together and synthesize information. And so with that, just-in-time sourcing of experts and then the stability of the internal commercialization lead, we make sure that we have the right people at the right time and that it's tailored depending on what we're working on. If you go to the next slide, just want to stress that we work across the funder life cycle, and so it's often the case as is Sophie's experience that we work very early on in the design of a funding program, hand in hand with the funder. But increasingly, we're also carried forward to support an awardee as they're actually going through the process of performing a project or a product development plan to support them all the way through to when funding might be towards the end, and we're thinking about transition and commercialization. And what we bring across that spectrum is the thought process around product development, commercialization, life after funding, and sustainability and scaling. With the last slide, if you move to the next one, we this is just that you'll see here the TTP and TPP as two arguably very important types of deliverables that we work on, but the sort of menu of services that we apply is broad and it really depends on what's needed, and it might span all the different product development disciplines in healthcare, whether it's thinking about manufacturing, thinking about regulatory, end user and stakeholder analysis, looking at the commercialization model, looking at pricing, intellectual property. And we don't just do that from a strategic standpoint. We actually embed and get very hands-on and tactical and even operational. So with that, we'll end and feel free to follow us on our LinkedIn page and reach out with any questions. And thank you.